Hey, good morning, everyone. I just want to do another installment in my Flat Earth Apologetics series. And so I just came off like a long hangout with on Jose Gonzalez's channel. And then so I was talking to a couple ball earthers afterwards. And, it was heated because I'm sensing more and more that they're hiding something. But it was cool because a lot of the stuff that's out there right now are, images of stuff typically over water. And then the water is like blocking some amount of the building or just something, in the horizon, I guess past the horizon. And so these are, what we have to work with now largely. And I think they're great. I think they could be used to support either side, ball earth and flat earth. But the thing that I've realized and I think would be cool, which again, a lot of things we don't necessarily have access to or time, or like the legal authority in some cases to do some of these kind of tests because they require, doing things, in a public place and all that kind of stuff. But talking to those guys, and I think it makes sense that those images, if we have a sense of how far the horizon is from where the person is standing, that distance, it's real physical distance, and then we can measure the exact amount that is being obstructed. Let's say there was like a really high pole with like little markers, every couple feet. And then so, again, this is theoretical because I don't think that this exists, but let's say there's a pole that's really, really high out there. And then, you could actually see its physical marker, the one that you can actually, you could maybe count from the top down and then get a sense of how much of the physical base is obstructed by the water. And then so that amount of physical obstruction coupled with the distance to the horizon, could be used to infer what the radius of the Earth is based on that image. And so those two parameters, if they're known, can be used to compute what the radius of the Earth would be based on that. And then one would think all these images that ball earthers are taking, stating that that is the Earth curve, would have to always be consistent. And to me, this is again very, very risky of them to keep doing this, to keep putting images up saying that it's Earth curve. But given observer height, the distance, the real physical distance to the horizon, and the amount of physical obstruction of an object, those parameters can be used to infer what the radius of the Earth would be. And so the distance to the horizon is kind of, just as difficult maybe as having, markers on a large, really tall pole. But, again, the way I'm imagining this is if you have like a marker and then a marker and then a marker and then a marker, and then it keeps kind of going in so they don't block each other from being seen. And then, like we could count the number that we see, or, the baller in the chat recommended just having somebody go, far out. And then, once they reach that point where, once they go 1 unit step forward, we don't see them. And then when they come back, we do. That point is a figure of merit for them in their calculation of how much is being obstructed, in their modeling. And so once the observer height, that distance, and then the distance that's being obstructed on the physical object in the distance, once that's known, those three numbers, the radius of the Earth can be inferred from that mathematically using basic geometry. And so, to me, it'll hold all those pictures accountable. I think, assuming that that's possible to model, I think that's risky if I was a baller to say that it's that simple, because to me, that distance to the horizon visually in an image is changing regularly. And but according to them, it doesn't change appreciably. And so, let's say that an image that, is understood that it's not a high or a low tide. That's just, what it is, in steady state. Then apparently with those three numbers, the radius of the Earth can be inferred consistently, and accurately. And so again, to me, that's risky, but this is what the math states. And so a lot of those images, I think, if this keeps kind of building fervor, I think people who do that will need to put markers on whatever their target is and then know exactly what the distance is that's being obstructed. And to me, this is again, actually, if we had, this is again very much off the shelf parts and doable. Again, if we had the ability to stick a very, very high pole in the middle of water anywhere, which is not an easy thing to do for a lot of reasons, but these are things that could replace these quote unquote sticks in the ground, which to me is just, if people are doing that in 2019, that's just people who are hiding something, because that is absurd, to be doing that kind of stuff in this day and age. And so, I would say it's, I'm glad I went through this dialogue, because to me, a lot of those images could again be used to support either side. And they were very much, inconclusive. But if there are these sort of, measurements built into the image themselves, that can be sort of a form of calibration, understanding what those distances are and appreciating them and knowing what they are fairly precisely. And if the ballers are making the claim that water level, that horizon line is Earth curve, then the math can hold them accountable to that. And then so again, all you need is the observer height, the distance from the person who's taking the camera or the picture from their feet to that horizon line, and then the amount of actual obstruction in that physical object, the bottom amount that's missing, the actual physical amount. And not with perspective and all these different things, you can actually attain its physical amount that is not being seen. And so to me, again, I'm not sure in the math that they took me through where perspective and all these different things would need to be accounted for. But according to them, if you have those figures, you can do a simple calculation to generate what the radius of the Earth would be with what we're observing in the picture. So I think as more and more people, I call them kind of traveling salesmen, used car salesmen, come by, flash pictures in front of us and say, explain this, explain that. You can say, for me to assess this image, I would need to know what the observer height is, what the distance from that person's feet to the, the water level line is. And then I would need to know a way to accurately measure the physical amount that's obstructed at the base. And then with those three things, once you tell me those, I'm going to go and do some geometry, basic geometry, to infer what the radius is based on what you just told me. And so to me, it can be much more of a constructive dialogue, much more verifiable. To me, I don't think it takes into account all the optical effects, but if they claim that that's all they need for it to quote unquote work and reaffirm the radius of the Earth, which apparently is known, and that obstruction is due to Earth curve, this math can hold really both sides accountable. And so the thing that I've said in other videos in my apologetic series is that, all these things, anything, with a camera or with our eyes is very, very dependent on the atmosphere. And this is also atmosphere, in my opinion, atmospheric, has significant atmospheric dependencies, and on, the amount of water levels might be high or low in that day or when that picture is actually snapped. And so apparently that can be taken into account. And according to this baller, who probably doesn't represent every ball earther, but he said that they're negligible. So again, to me, I was kind of glad I went through this back and forth, because there's a way to take these images and, in my opinion, not really redeem them because they're useful, but to kind of pin them down a bit more quantitatively, instead of just looking at an image and people kind of talking about them, and a lot of times talking in circles. And so I just throw that out there. I think that that would be a nice thing. And then if you can couple that with a side angle analysis, to me, that in isolation has enough information and data in there with modern day technology to be a hub for assessing curvature or lack of. And so I just wanted to put that out there, just because, again, I feel like the vibe that I get, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's felt this, is that people are flashing pictures in front of us and saying, explain this, and then like we have to come up with terms that they're comfortable with, that they're used to explain it, when if we can just boil it down to 3 numbers that will then dictate, or we'll be able to infer what the radius is. To me, it takes a lot of that sort of qualitative stuff out of it, and really hold these ballers accountable for what they're showing us, proclaiming that is Earth curve. So hope everyone's doing well. Bye.